Let me start by a couple of questions which I constantly keep facing myself. So, the number one question, okay, what is the role of biofuel in this whole energy transition? Why and why biofuel at all? I mean, if we are going towards solar and solar is going to be such a big portion, why do we care about biofuel at all? Especially since there are competing demands on that resource. It could be a source of food. Why do we need to consider it as a source of fuel?
Am I audible? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's be very honest. Let's take a look at where we are currently, and I will also streamline that other question of the grids and why there is such a big push towards grids going forward, also as a part of the same question. At present, a large percentage of our energy resources are met through fossil energy, nearly 70% largely. This energy source, although it has been villainized and vilified and pillorized in modern society, has one big advantage. It is extremely energy dense. So even if one were to use this energy source relatively inefficiently, as if one looks at thermodynamic efficiencies of motor cars and various other combustion based resources, they are relatively inefficient anywhere between 35 to 40%. Despite that, most of the heat is wasted, but whatever little is available is what has driven that great energy and industrial transformation since the 1800s to the present. Now, going forward, there are going to be obviously certain sectors where direct conversion of electricity is not viable. One may need to carry a substantial amount of energy as a reserve with you in a compact, high density manner. Long distance aviation comes to mind. One cannot put batteries on an airplane for the simple reason that for all the talks, for the amount of energy in every kilogram of aviation grade kerosene, you will need about 14 to 15 kilos of lithium ion high density batteries. Fire risks notwithstanding, that's a lot of payload and a lot of space that will completely wipe out the economies of a sector which operates on wafer thin margins as it is. So, in all of these sectors, there has to be some liquid energy carrying fuel, and obviously, it cannot be hydrogen, as I said in my presentation as well, because it's too fluffy in the sense it's not energy dense enough, and biofuels can fit in there. Secondly, since these are largely hydrocarbon based fuels again, they will be compatible with the existing machinery of most internal combustion systems. Indeed, most aviation engines are already compatible. It's only the rubber and the connectors on the fuel systems which will need to be modified. So, in that sense, biofuels have a place to lubricate the energy transition by fitting into gaps where direct electrification is not possible. Needless to say, direct electrification is preferred, but where it's not possible, some combustion-based fuel, including biofuels. Now, when it comes to the consumption of food resources for fuel, this is a question that is largely based on the first generation of biofuels, particularly the crop and grain based biofuels. Indeed, these will play a smaller role going forward, but there is also significant effort from algae. There is significant effort from reusing cooking fats, oils, esterification, which will, and saponification of fats, for example. These are areas that are developing, and these will create feedstocks akin to kerosene, high density diesel, etc., which don't compete essentially with food resources. So, a combination of the fact that it is not going to be the prime driver of the energy transition, and the new technologies will, of course, reduce the overlap with food grains. So that is where we see biofuels going.
Yeah, I go back to the quote that you had made earlier. One is it is horses for courses, and second is, of course, the fact that all hands on deck approach. So we need all the help that we can from any technology, and any every technology might not be applicable in every situation. So we have to take advantage of whichever technology can help us.
Indeed, and I will like to come in here with one more point. Uh, a large part of the vertical integration of the fossil fuel infrastructures that have existed so far has been derived from the fundamental energy density of that entity. For example, if there is a thermal power plant, it will produce about 1,000 to 3,000 watts per square meter of land it occupies. A solar irradiation in a place like the Sahara Desert would be close to 250 watts per square meter. It's already an order of magnitude lower, and then you take on the conversion efficiency losses, you're at 50 watts per square meter from panels in a good geography, less about 10 to 15 in places like Germany. Yet, in places like Germany also, has caught on, and Germany, despite initial criticism, showed very clearly that if you're willing to pay for being the first adopter and tolerate the nuisance values that come with sometimes immature technologies, it is very viable. And because of the high energy density inherent in fossil fuels, one could store it in an ad hoc manner. One could combust it, waste a large part of that energy, and harness whatever little was got. It was a huge pie. Whether you spill most of it on the floor, the crumbs are enough to fill your stomach for 3 meals. Now the pie is smaller. It's a much better pie, but it's a smaller pie. You've gone from a burger joint to a gourmet restaurant now. The portion sizes are smaller. You can't put it on the floor as easily. So that is one thing. At the same time, when you're having a gourmet restaurant, they'll not pile all your food on the table at one go. It has to be eaten at a correct time, at a correct temperature. Everything will keep coming. So now it is not the size of the table that matters, it's the quality of the flow and the pipe, which is where the grid comes in. The low density, the just in time demand, and dynamic monitoring would mean that grids have to be really, really good. You cannot afford to waste on the grid. And indeed, this is not very recent statistics, but just post COVID, when a lot of infrastructure spending had got stalled out, etc., India ranked among the highest. India wastes nearly 40% of all generated electricity in just T&D losses. Again, when the pie is small, you cannot just squander it on the floor and say, I'll eat the crumbs. That's why the T&D infrastructure has to catch up. And it was an area traditionally characterized by long payback periods, and it was not a sexy sector to therefore invest in. So there has been systematic underinvestment there, and it is now required, which is what will drive the T&D side of the infrastructure. So to understand that, lower energy density, greater flow based demand, and therefore T&D.
Yeah, no, you covered a lot of the questions that I had on transmission investment related things. One question on the side of, on the geopolitical impact of this energy transition. And I know for a fact that you are an expert on a lot of things related to how geopolitics pan out as well. So this is a societal change. It's not only a technological change. It is going to change the way the economies are structured right now, and it is going to have far reaching impact. So if you can throw some light on what you perceive, and I understand these are all hypothecation and we have no idea how it will pan out and what timelines at all, but if you can throw some second order thinking on the possible impacts of this energy transition.
Indeed. I will divide it into two areas. One would be resource use. There are people who are also asking about water use, people who are asking about land use, etc. And there would be, of course, the geopolitical impacts. So let's begin with the geopolitical impacts. At no point in the history of this planet have so many people been enthralled to such a small region as the Middle East. I assume most of us are joining us from India, so it is neither to our middle nor to our east. Therefore, we still use, but yet we use the term because it covers a diverse region very effectively. Calling it, because if you call it just Arab Asia, then you would miss out the Maghreb provinces of Africa. Calling it the calling it the Iraqi Empire would be wrong in many ways because many people are Turkish or of other side branches of Islam which were not part of the Iraqi Empire. So that entire construct was created by the British when they were leaving that region from the wreckage of the Ottoman Empire. That region would have remained in obscurity had oil not been discovered over there. And indeed, that oil graph that both I showed, you have showed at various points, uh, The rise of oil, particularly in the 50s, really grew after those shallow oil fields in Saudi Arabia were discovered. It has given those regions incredible power. Now, many among us, the older ones among us may remember that the 74 oil crisis, 73, 74 oil crisis after that war was, many assume, was created by Saudi throttling production. Saudi did nothing. Saudi did not ramp up production in response to demand. That was enough to drive oil prices up 4 times. So, in terms of geopolitics, there would be a decentralization of energy, first. Secondly, there will be globalization continuing, but that will be globalization of talent, IP, and information rather than physically things moving from one geography to the other. When I can make my own energies, there would be no need to depend upon others. So, the window of opportunity for most geopolitically powerful actions in the coming years will close. So, regimes which are desperate will try to act desperate in the coming 10 to 12 years. Otherwise, the window of opportunity would be gone. The other point we should see geopolitically is China. Varun has also pointed out that there were significant advances made by China. China started out as a low cost manufacturer, but they are now trying to add value to an aging population by moving towards the distribution and marketing side or towards the IP side. The question is, will they get there before they get too old? Will they get rich first? Will they get old first? Sadly, it looks like they're going to get old first, and there is going to be desperation on their part, which will lead to a lot of geopolitical instability due to a rich and militarily muscular China trying to secure whatever resources it requires in the region. So, the energy transition, like every transition, is going to cause a change in the world order. There are many second, third order effects. Which companies will survive, we don't know. But rather worryingly, all the oil companies are still focused on paying out dividends and paying out massive amounts to write off previous debt rather than actually focusing on becoming green. So when oil companies talk about green energy, it's more, in my opinion, at least a little bit of greenwashing than them actually taking it very seriously. They think it's business as usual. Just on the point of water, of course, cheaper energy will allow uh, desalination and all of these technologies to be accessible at a much lower price. And of course, water based resources will assume increasing importance. And then the desalination will come with its own problems. What do you do with that salt rich brine? Do you dump it back in the sea and create a ecological dead zone? So we will have to cross various problems as we come to those bridges. But these are technically exciting times, and when incumbency is disturbed, that is the time when allocation benefits are maximum.
Right. No, thanks for that response. One more question is on the peak oil. How how much etched in stone is it? Are we definitely done with the age of fossil fuels, whether it is coal or oil, or they will still have some role to play? And second question, in addition to that, is are we just moving from being controlled by oil oligarchs to maybe renewable oligarchs? I mean, for the lack of better words. Uh,
Um, I'll take it in two steps. First of all, when it comes to oligarchs, having a term renewable energy oligarch is as ironic as having a term like a vegetarian lion. It is inconceivable for several reasons. Oligarchies are created by a small group of people or individuals controlling the resources of an entire group or a country broadly. These examples abound in Africa. But for all of these, you need a concentration of natural resources and the ability of the leader to bribe or otherwise manipulate the system to ensure that the economic rents, what belongs to the whole group, is concentrated only with that individual. Now, in terms of renewable energy, there can be corruption, but ultimately, market forces will have a significantly greater impact on the prices. Although China has set up so many capacities, uh, if you take an analogy with a mined commodity or like oil, if I don't want to use oil, once those oil field infrastructures have been depreciated out, I can choose not to extract the oil. It has been sitting under the ground for tens of thousands of years, where it will continue to sit for the next tens of thousands of years unless I touch it. Unfortunately, for factories for renewable capacities, it is a fast changing technological field, and therefore, in that area, one would have significant motivation to get that factory over with, earn money from it, and put up the next capacity as and where it may be required. So, the dynamics of the two systems are totally different. In the first one, in the oligarchy system, you use your capital advantage to build a fort, get on top of that fort, and rain down rocks on anyone who tries to come up to you. In this system, you have to keep moving, be innovative, and be rapidly adjusting so that you get return on capital rather than fencing your capital and protecting it. So the dynamics of the two systems are significantly different, and therefore this is a system which will be much more equitable, but at the same time, it will also punish poor allocations much more brutally because there is no fencing in of the capital by geopolitical factors.
Uh, the question that remained unanswered was about the peak oil.
So that's
Not only peak oil, but also there is some fear that the foundation on which this clean energy transition is happening itself is based on fossil fuel. And how does one explain that irony, and how is it good for planet Earth if most of the critical raw materials are still coming from mining and fossil sources?
so after that point, the next thing is peak oil and the resources. Now, peak oil was a term that actually came into fashion in the 1970s. There was a point that was debated that there would be a peak in oil production, demand would continue to rise, and oil prices will therefore go into the stratosphere. That has not happened. That will never happen because when oil prices rise, the demand side gets contracted due to efficiency improvements, while there is significant motivation on resource constrained supply side to pump out even more, which brings prices down. As you also alluded, if there's a spike in oil prices, it quickly comes back down again. Now, as far as certain areas, particularly in plastics, particularly in petrochemicals, oil will play a role far more into the future than as a transportation fuel. Unfortunately, the demand from that is much smaller and less dynamic than from transportation fuels. And it is very difficult to paralyze a country by not giving them petrochemicals compared to not giving them transportation fuels. So, although oil will play a role, it will have a significantly diminishing role, and I foresee that it will not be a significant player in the global geopolitical scene like previous. Now, when it comes to creating value, uh, let me put it a little jocularly and say it's a question of Raju ban gaya gentleman. I mean, there can be. I mean, my father could have been someone of a disreputable profession, but ठीक है ना, बेटे को पढ़ा लिखा के अच्छा पोस्ट पे लाया. It is that kind of thing. We use whatever energy resources are available. Now, on my very last slide, I had presented something about the payback times. The present payback times are between 3 years to 4 years, whereas the doubling rate for renewable energies has been of the order of 3 to 3.5 years. The payback periods were longer still in the past, 5 years or so. So, if the payback time is longer than the doubling time for that renewable resource, that gap has to be covered by something which is the fossil fuels. The problem, and when we see about oil, one thing which we see is as the capital deserts oil, it may leave at a rate which is faster than is required for oil to slowly taper off. So there can be occasional spikes in oil demand which is not met. Particularly, investments into new resource exploration is at a historical low. So essentially, there will be spikes, but as they say, दिया बुझने के पहले जोर जोर से जलता है. It is that kind of situation which is taking place.
Right.
That's very beautifully explained, Arunji. Uh, Ravi, I have a connected question to you, and relevant to everybody in the audience. You have seen very early cycles of pharma getting built out from the early 2000s, and chemical industry you identified again, much before. So, does India really have the right to win to build the same scale of manufacturing as has been demonstrated in pharma and chemical, probably. Do
So
we have all
I'll
this?
put it this way. See, whenever there is a new industry born, usually people underestimate the kind of wealth that is going to get created. Honestly, nobody spoke about chemical as a sector way back in 2014. Today, now we have specialist chemical analyst in every brokerage house. Defense analyst is a new animal that has just arrived on Dalal Street.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have railway analysts too very soon. So as you see, and we don't have new energy analyst yet on the street, and 3 years down the line we'll have many new energy analysts on the street as well. So usually when a new industry is born, there is a lot of wealth to be created. And honestly, I believe right to win is a concept that is applicable more in the second innings, where the pie doesn't grow anymore, where you have to fight for your share. In the round one, where the industry is going to go through an explosive phase, honestly, it's who has the bigger shovel and who can collect how much gold is the winner usually. So I am not too worried about the right to win as much as who is actually ahead of the curve and right in place to capitalize on the opportunity, which is here and now, rather than 3 years down the line. So I would put it that way, that there is going to be tremendous. Yeah, just couple of questions for Arvind, adding into this theme only, is that we have spoken a lot about, transmission is going to play a big role. Without naming any company, what are the other ancillaries along with transmission, like industrial gases or some specialized steel, or which are the kind of industries, and again, refrain from naming any company, but which are the industries that we should be focusing on where there can be tremendous wealth creation, which are these picks and shovel sellers to this great mega trend of clean energy transition?
The picks and shovels, as we said, first of all, there would be significant demand for transmission capabilities. So within that, there would be the wires themselves, the conductors, that is basically copper. There would be sizable demand on the other side for transformers, smart meters, that is on the T&D side largely. There would also be significant demand for software integrated solutions which will tie all these instruments together to create a smart grid. On the hydrogen side, there will be significant capex involved in creating manufacturing infrastructure for large scale electrolyzers, although China holds an edge there as well. But there will be some capabilities that will start coming to India. Specialist steel players will see sizable improvements, and metallurgy and alloys. And here one has to be very careful when dealing with hydrogen. It's a small and relatively nasty molecule in that sense. It has nasty effects on most metals, particularly ferritic steels. So high martensite grade steels may be required for that. So again, the highly integrated large steel players who have a good R&D track record will all benefit. And the transitions of these kinds will essentially expose the technical and balance sheet failings of smaller players. They will not be having probably the capability to catch up with this transition, and they will lose business share as well. The other picks and shovels, other than these, would be backward integration by large extent solar manufacturers in India itself, uh, the Internet of Things, as I already mentioned, and particularly AI and cloud-driven solutions as a backup for staging maintenance, O&M. There can be knockback effects on wide area monitoring, including the use of drones for monitoring solar panels. So the potential is endless. Once the transition happens, now the whole ecosystem will grow. The fact that those first 1 terawatt of a little over a terawatt of solar panels has been installed means the ecosystem is now in place. The first of the synapsids is evolved. Now it's time for all the T-Rexes to start coming out.
Yeah, no, I think that helps a lot. I mean, that provides us with a lot of lead on where to start working, and something tells me that we are going to have far more employment in the research analyst community as well, which this sector is going to throw out. Yeah. So again,
I think
coming
we
back
have
to, sorry.
we had a question on with Arvinji. Can that $1 green hydrogen number be achieved that is being spoken about?
Oh, definitely, definitely, definitely it can be achieved, sir. Definitely it can be achieved simply because the enabler, of course, the learning rates for electrolyzers has been growing, has been sloping the prices down quite significantly. But more than the electrolyzer learning rates, it's the cost of electricity that enables or thwarts that effort. So, if solar energy levelized costs reduced, with the levelized cost of electricity will reduce the levelized cost of hydrogen, pretty much. And just as an aside here, one of the ways of reducing levelized cost of electricity used to be improving the efficiency of the renewable energy source, particularly solar. But as we push up against the hard limits of the Shockley-Quasar limit, the question will be, should we go to multi-junction devices, which are more expensive to fabricate, and go towards efficiency, or would there be benefits in improving the capacity factor by having tilting panels which actually track the sun, bifacialization, and manufacturing improvements where you reduce the shading of the panel from the bus bars and so on? So it's going to be again an all hands on deck, push towards efficiency, push towards improved utilization, and taking it
So
forward from there.
for people who are investors, either in institutional or non-institutional, debt providers, capital providers, how does one have a framework to identify which are the winning possible technologies? How does one eliminate and select? So there is talk of obviously lithium ion versus a sodium ion or a zinc based, or so that is the battery side. Within solar, there is silicon based versus the cadmium, the thin film based. Uh, how does really one think about which technologies will really build scale?
Regarding technologies building scale, there are several frameworks. Now, this calls to mind or reminds one of the way nuclear energy used to be in the 50s, essentially. We see only pressurized water reactors now in service. Many of the other reactors were simply left unexplored. The reason for that was because not technical maturity. This pressurized water became technically matured because Hyman G. Rickover said that we want nuclear powered warships in the US military. And the US military put all its financial, or the Navy specifically, put all its massive financial and manufacturing might behind the pressurized water reactor, and it grew to scale. In the same way, we see that there is manufacturing scale already built for solar using crystalline silicon and other value chains. There is large infrastructure available, and there is significant fungibility of that infrastructure to handle substantially different types of silicon, which is what has built power in that value chain itself as a whole. And that is what China has also ruthlessly exploited to control every node on that value chain. Now, when it comes to batteries, again, it would be a question of which technology is having the ability to combine power and energy density in the best possible manner for the use. And secondly, how easy is it to mass produce? A lot of these technologies have been able to learn by doing, achieve significant operating leverage on the construction side, and therefore become cheaper for mass adoption. So any technology which is not able to do that would remain in the research state, which is why I had also shown the solar concentrator. It's a great idea, but uska cost has never managed to come down. So the one parameter that one monitors would be the levelized cost. When levelized costs start approaching fossil levels, that is when investment will start flowing in, and that is the time it becomes attractive in risk to return to an investor. So the one number would be the levelized cost, the other would be the energy payback time. These are the two numbers to usually monitor.
So there is one question which is kind of asking, a panel manufacturing company gets one-time revenue generating like a capital goods company, or they would have recurring revenue coming from current order book. So I would like to answer that in two parts. One is that this is not a capital goods. Yes, the lifetime of a panel is probably 20-25 years. But you have to see what has happened in China. Some of the companies like Longi, Jinko Solar have gone from 2 gigawatt to 100 gigawatt. And the first you have to look at the opportunity. If there is going to be like 6-7 terawatt kind of capacity, 5-7 years from now, there is a far more headroom for these companies to grow. The second question is, let's say at some point of time we reach a size and scale from where incremental growth in solar panel is not possible, or there is an oversupply situation. That could happen. We don't know when it will happen. It doesn't look likely in the next 3-5 year horizon, is what our submission is. But these companies will grow 10, 20, 30x in size, and they will have so much cash flow at their disposal. There is an optionality to that. There are so many opportunities available to deploy that cash flow. So I wouldn't look at any company that is catering to the energy transition theme as only a solar module manufacturing company, because already the aspirations are there to be backward integrating, forward integrating, going into adjacencies in this opportunity. So a lot of things can happen. It's too early to talk about the terminal value risk of a panel manufacturing company, in my opinion.
Could I just come in here and add one point?
Sure.
Till 2021, 22 end broadly, a little over a terawatt. Now, this is power. This is not the energy. This is about a terawatt of solar power has been available. That's probably what humanity has added ever. Over the next decade alone, even Varun was presenting this, we would add conservatively 3, maybe up to 5 terawatt of power. We are going to add over 5 times the amount of solar energy alone just for electricity growth as what has been added in the entirety of humanity till this point. So the question would then probably be, would they be able to ramp up their plant enough to a size where they can cater to orders, or the pie itself is growing that large? The pie is growing at that rate. The second point is that when it comes to those capacity additions for solar, we have at this point only talked about electricity. In one of my slides, I presented that if one plays green hydrogen fully, those green hydrogen will require their own solar capacities on top of them rather than taking it out of the grid to be cost effective for that $1 a kilogram point which was previously raised. So the demand is going to be so large that even if they were manufacturers, if they are just able to stay on top of that properly, that would be a fantastic opportunity right here.
So, any last questions? Because we'll have to end this. It's been
Yes.
almost 2.5 hours since we're doing this. So, thank you everyone for the participation. But any last questions? Vimesh, any question from your end?
No, I'll. My question will be on nuclear, but I'll take it on some other time, not now.
No, you can go ahead and ask. I think that's his
Where does nuclear power,
right up Arvind's alley.
Yeah.
Dr. Arvind, it's for you. Where does nuclear power, fits in this kind of thing? And what is India's position when it comes to thorium?
Let's put it, since you let's take this as the last question, and I'll answer this off very clearly here. Um, Nuclear, let's go back to history. In the 1950s, the great Glenn T. Seaborg had assumed that 50% of the world's energy by the 1970s would be nuclear, and by 2092, all of it would be nuclear supplied. Now, nuclear has certain benefits. It's very energy dense, and definitely it might have a place to play in the transitionary phase of the green energy transition. However, there are also certain problems. Nuclear was always the child of the nuclear weapons program, and many countries, including India, keep this program running because of our strategic needs in terms of our immediate neighborhood with nuclear armed neighbors. Now, when it comes to the absolute levelized cost of nuclear energy, if you remember that levelized cost equation, no matter how low my installation cost or how efficient my electricity production, if my maintenance cost is going to continue for infinity, it is not going to remain viable. So nuclear waste management and how to deal with that, and how do you decommission a nuclear site and hand it over to somebody else, like for example, if there's a solar panel farm on the outskirts of the city, 20 years later the city has grown to that size, I can say, "ठीक है भाई, remove the panels, let's put up a shopping mall here." You can't do that with the reactor. That area is off limits to the best of our understanding and should remain under institutional control forever. So that militates against nuclear power. And finally, nuclear power is safe, but then saying that any technology is safe is a statement of arrogance, in my opinion, Vimesh ji. Wide scale deployment karenge to Six Sigma events are bound to happen. And the problem is, nuclear has created Six Sigma events like Fukushima and Chernobyl, which has dented its public acceptance significantly. Any technology stands on a triad of government policy, public acceptance, and economic viability. Leaving its defense origin issues aside, solar and others are much more economically viable. Public acceptance is gone. So what used to be an auto rickshaw is now only left with its front wheel. So it is running around rather slowly. Thorium, as far as India has been concerned, is a technological challenge. It will add further cost to the levelized cost because we will need significant reprocessing capabilities. Is it viable to add it, therefore, on a very large scale remains to be seen. As a capability of technology for an advanced India, definitely that capability of research and R&D will be maintained. Whether it will be fully deployed, that is a big question. And personally, I don't think the day of that technology will ever come. The time for that technology is gone. Levelized costs are too high, and predictability is quite poor in that area. Thank you.
I'd just add one bit from my side. I mean, the ValueQuest team under Ravi, last 2 years, since we began our journey towards studying renewables, uh, it's a whole new world of understanding, and the whole world itself is changing around it. It's been very exciting. Obviously, we've studied biofuels, we've studied solar. The new pastures are going to be green hydrogen and battery. So it's just begun. Some people are behind the scenes. We three are presenting. I would also acknowledge Vishal's effort over the last 2 years on this. And yes, it's a great beginning for the firm to be able to identify an industry which is just at the cusp of becoming really the next mega profit pool. Ravi.
No, yeah, I think you missed out saying Aniket's name also. Aniket has been instrumental in helping a lot on this as well. But with that, thank you everyone. I hope it was informative and worth your time. 2.5 hours on a Saturday morning.
No, first of all, thank you to Ravi, Varun, Dr. Arvind. We have received much more than what we expected, and almost 2.5 hours or even more than that passed just like that only. Probably we'll need a different session for a few hours on transmission and distribution and geopolitical. Transmission and distribution will be a real money-making engine, it seems like, and geopolitical will be,
Right.
interesting. Some other time, but surely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your
Thank you.
attention.
Thank
And
Thank you.